Well, we come to the end of our series about that we're calling Connect. Last week, Pastor Joe talked about us being connectors to Christ out in the world. And today we're going to bring it back home. We're going to talk about being connectors right here. This morning we're talking about hospitality, folks. So let's take a moment to pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable to you. Amen. The reading this morning talked about extravagant hospitality. And I can remember when Pastor Joe and I just arrived a year and a half ago, we had a lot of small gatherings at people's homes, and we were treated to extravagant hospitality. But one of the questions that we asked at each one of those was, what hopes do you have for the church? And the first hope that I remember hearing was that everyone feels at home at Medford United Methodist Church. That was their wish for us, but more importantly, it was their wish for everyone who comes through the door, that this might feel like home. Well, any of you that have moved from one place to another know it takes a while for a place to feel like home, to know the ins and outs, where the light switches are, how to make coffee, things like that. So it really takes a while to feel at home. Even in the new community, it takes a while to feel at home. Could take weeks, could take months. But I think what we want here in the church and what they were really talking about as a hope was that feeling of welcome, that feeling of extravagant hospitality like we heard Abraham extended to the strangers. Think about walking into a hotel. Sheila, you just got back from a nice hotel. Think about walking into a hotel, some of you have been on vacation recently, or a restaurant or a store, where you're greeted and treated with extravagant hospitality. When we were at the Bishop's Convocation at Ocean Place a few weeks ago, and they were expecting a big blizzard along the coastline, and they greeted us right from the moment we pulled into the driveway to tell us how to get to the parking lot in the midst of that snowstorm. And then they met us at the entrance to the parking garage and said, "Can I take your suitcase and show you where registration is?" Now, granted, we were going through a construction zone to get to the registration place, so we kind of needed that extra help. But it was extravagant hospitality that we were greeted to. I can remember going to Liberia, and they greeted us there with song. And they laid down their palm branches and some cloth on the ground as we walked into their village. It was incredible, extravagant hospitality. Now, we need to talk about hospitality in the church because in the church, we only get one chance. It's not like feeling at home where you've got a long period of time to help people feel at home. That will come later. But first, it's the hospitality and the welcome. It shouldn't make any difference whether the guest in our midst has traveled from a great distance around the world or whether they're right here in town. It doesn't matter who they are. Every guest gets the same welcome. And that's a tall order. But a sincere welcome, an extravagant welcome, can be the deciding factor, not just for what happens to that guest inside this building, but what happens when they walk outside the door? Will they come back? Will they recommend us to someone else? Will they talk about what a wonderful place this was? Not just they seemed friendly, but they are friendly. We went to Urban Promise this past week for lunch and to see the campus. And from the moment, again, that we stepped outside of the car, there were people outside the building to greet us, to welcome us. There were students inside the door directing us where to go. We were treated to a wonderful lunch, and they even answered some special dietary needs. And then they were willing to take us anywhere on the campus, and every single person we saw on that campus had a smile and a welcome for us. The person that took us around on the tour was the custodian. the groundskeeper, the maintenance man. And he hadn't even had his lunch. He walked around the whole time showing us the building, carrying his lunch with him. I mean, it was just extravagant hospitality. And that's what we all need to be fully committed to. That's what Urban Promise was fully committed to, is fully committed to, that type of hospitality that was described in Genesis. So put yourself in Abraham's position. Just sitting there having a cup of coffee, minding your own business, thinking either, reflecting about what had gone on during the day or maybe what still was to happen. And these strangers appear before you. Now, in this day and age, we might just go back inside, right? And ignore them. We don't want to enter into a conversation with someone we don't know. It might be uncomfortable for us. But Abraham didn't just say hello. He didn't just smile. He ran to greet them. He ran to greet them. And he brought them refreshment, not just a cup of water, which was the first thing he did, but then went and killed the fatted calf and used, did you hear it, the best flour? Had Sarah use the best flour to make cakes. Now, in the Middle Eastern culture in that time, as still today, that is part of their culture. We may find that hard to believe that that's part of their culture, and yet in the ancient days, that was part of what they did. The travelers needed protection from the elements. They needed to get a cup of water after they traveled through the desert. And the settlements were usually near the water stops, and they also would have more than just a few people there. And they might have some wealth gathered among them, even if it was wealth in the way of their cattle or their sheep. And so they needed protection. And so there was this reciprocal agreement that one would offer hospitality and the other would help and to provide protection and to promise not to harm the one that was giving them the hospitality. Those were strict codes of conduct that were part of their culture. The residents were obligated, and the food became a symbol of friendship, kind of a covenant agreement. This mutual respect that was shown to them. Now, just in case we think that that's a thing of the past in the Middle East, too, hear what this travel guide has written. Her name is Friedel Rother, and she's a travel writer, and she has a guide to accepting and adapting hospitality in the Middle East. It's hard to be positive about the Middle East, she writes, when watching the nightly news. We cross the border between Greece and Turkey nervously, visions of militants and bombs in our minds. She's a bicyclist, by the way. Those fears dissolved as the first shopkeeper we met insisted on putting a thick wedge of homemade cheese and grapes from his garden into our bags. It was the first clue that our primary danger was not death at gunpoint, but rather death by overfeeding. The key to enjoying this warm welcome is simply to be brave enough to accept the offers that come your way. Now, we all know that the world is a dangerous place, and we do have to be careful, but this was their experience. And it continues to be the experience of many who travel throughout the Middle East. Being hospitable has a lot to do with being brave, and that's being hospitable by extending it as well as receiving the hospitality. We've got to be able to and willing to kind of break through those old habits and move out of our comfort zones and welcome new people into our lives. In September, Pastor Joe and Claire Rich and I attended a leadership workshop in Kansas City at the Church of the Resurrection. And you were given a card when you came in. We took a workshop on hospitality. And so we want to talk a little bit this morning about the things we learned that are possible to do in any congregation. Hospitality requires us to be intentional. There was nothing wishy-washy at all about welcoming someone as Abraham did. It means we've got to get up out of our seats and put ourselves out there to extend the hand of fellowship and the peace of Christ. And get this, we've got to do that to people we don't know. Now, I know that might be a challenge in this service, but we do sometimes have guests who come among us. And I bet that if you look around the room, there are still people that even though you know their faces, you haven't had a real conversation with them. Hospitality is being friendly, yes, but it requires more than just a smile and a handshake. It means we need to be intentional, and that is taking the next step in the process, which means we introduce ourselves and we start to connect in some kind of way. Remember how easy it used to be on the playground and just say to somebody, "Hey, you want to play?" And you'd climb the jungle gym together, or you'd get on the swings together, or you'd play in the sandbox together. That's the kind of attitude we need to have. We kind of lose that as we grow up, don't we? Words of welcome, and then engaging the other person in an activity. I know what you're thinking, because I'm the first one to say, "Whoa, you want me to do that?" Christ never said that being a disciple was going to be easy, did he? But together we can learn how to do this. It takes time. It takes a lot of practice. I know, and I admit it, I'm not great at names. In fact, I'd say I'm pretty bad at remembering names. And frankly, I'm a little bit taken aback by people that are overly zealous. But, small talk is not my strong suit either sometimes. But we can do this. We can work on it. Because you know what? It's not so much about what we say and being able to carry on a long conversation with somebody. A lot of times it's more about listening. Because hospitality is about the other person. Hospitality is not about you. It's about the other person. And so listening becomes incredibly important. Remember, a stranger is just a friend waiting to happen. The more we practice being hospitable here, the more natural it's going to become. And the more welcoming guests are going to find this church. So let's look at the card that the ushers gave you. And if you didn't get one, the ushers will have them on the way out. And we've put it up here. Oh, no, the other one. The 5-10, there we go. 5-10 link rule. Okay, so the 5-10 link rule is a covenant that the congregation makes to change long ingrained behaviors. It's a culture change, folks. And everybody in the congregation who's part of this covenant, every week, at every service, covenants that for 5 minutes before and after each service, we're going to intentionally find someone we don't know and introduce ourselves. Like I said, it's a culture change. It's going to feel a little odd. It's going to push us beyond our comfort zones, and it's going to be harder for some of us than for others. But it's entirely possible to make those changes that we need to become truly hospitable. So one size says the 5-10 link rule. 5 refers to time. Fellowship with friends is incredibly important. And we don't want to prevent you from saying hello to your friends. But just take 5 minutes before and after the service to meet someone you don't know. The 10 refers to space. So think of about 10 feet out, about 10 feet around you. If you're standing and talking to someone that you know, and you notice someone out there that you don't know, go over and introduce yourself and include them in the conversation. It's about reaching out and bringing them back in. It's about connecting. And that's really what link is about. It's about connecting someone to someone else because of some commonality that they have. For example, at last week's new members class, we discovered that, I think it was at least 3, it may have been 4 people, all live in the Deerbrook section of Medford. They wouldn't have known that if we hadn't asked them to tell us something about themselves. So they went around the table, and Gloria was one of them, right? And then we went farther, and there were a few more. So that's the link part of the 5-10 link rule. So find something common, and then link them to somebody that has that same commonality. So you might ask, how do we do that? What do we say? It feels a little awkward, doesn't it? It's one thing to be in a new members class where everybody's new, but if we look around here, a lot of us have been here for a number of years. A lot of us were here before the building was. Mentioning no names. But there's always new people coming and going. The place to start is always with a greeting and a sharing of names. But sometimes, not so much in this service, but in other services, and when you go out into the narthex or go get a cup of coffee, it's hard to know whether the stranger that we see is a guest or a longtime member. We might recognize a face, but we don't know their name. So all you need to do is you go up and you say to someone, "Hello, my name is Kathleen." And generally, if the person wants to engage in conversation, they'll say, "Hello, my name is," and then you start a conversation. If they simply say hello and move on and don't really feel like getting engaged, then you respect that. Don't force it. You don't want to become a stalker. You know, we don't want to become a stalker here. So now you go up to someone else and you say, "Help me with a name." "John, Kathleen, good to see you. I knew that I'd seen you so many times, but I just couldn't remember your name." Now, isn't that a helpful one to know? How many times do we see somebody that we don't remember their names? We see them week after week after week. Help me with a name. It's so simple, isn't it? No hard feelings. We've all done it. We all know what it's like. But hospitality is more than exchanging names, because after you've exchanged names, it's time to introduce that person to someone else that you know. Okay, so remember, we didn't come to church to talk about the weather, although we do that a lot, especially on Sunday morning and in the wintertime. But we are here to get to know one another, to build a relationship with God and with one another. That's why we're here. So look for a friend and say something like, I'd like you to meet my friend John." And if you can't remember the person's name because you've just met John, and it's like, weird name, went right out of my head, then we say something like, "Have you two met?" And then you can take the lead and exchange names. So if you have forgotten both of their names, it works every time. "Have you two met?" And then they're going to exchange their names with each other, and you've now heard them again, and it should help you remember. 3 times? You have to hear it 3 times before you remember it. Okay. For some of us, it's even longer. It's more times than that. Oh, definitely. So there's different ways that we can do that. And they're simple. It's just a matter of getting into the habit of doing so and moving beyond the comfort of simply having a smile. We need to respect people's social cues, watch the body language. If they don't want to engage, they don't want to engage. But they're still going to go away feeling like, wow, these people are friendly. I'm not ready to engage at that level, but they're friendly. And maybe I'll consider coming back. So look at the other side of the card, the weave side. What we're called to do is to kind of weave this tapestry of hospitality that God provides for us and that God is trying to engage us in. So when we think of weave, the W is welcome on a personal level. Well, that's what we were just talking about. The E is reminding us to empathize. So when you start the conversation, listen to what the other person's saying. Don't be thinking about how you're going to respond. Don't be thinking about, oh, I had that same operation and it was horrible, And before you know it, your mind has just gone off in a whole different direction, and you really haven't heard a bit about what that person wanted to tell you. So empathize with others. Truly listen. And then acknowledge what their needs are. They may have been coming here for a long time. They finally are now ready to engage someone in conversation, but they don't know where the restroom is, or they don't know where the Sunday school is, or something else. We have tons of people here who have never seen the whole building. Do you know that? I'm always astounded when I find out that there are people who haven't been from one end of the building to the other. You mean there's rooms underneath Booker Hall? Wow. What happens in those rooms? We have a preschool? Really? Could I see the rooms? So that's what we're talking about when we say acknowledge the needs of the other and then verify that their needs have been met. If you don't have time to take someone on a tour of the building, find someone who does. And then exit on a personal level. You can exit knowing that you have made a new acquaintance, someone who might become a lifelong friend. That's the difference between someone who's a visitor and someone who's a guest. A visitor may well enjoy their visit, but a guest makes a connection with people, makes a connection with the environment, and you know what? Might even connect with Christ because of what you've done in extending that hand of hospitality. Abraham didn't know who his visitors were, but he treated them, each of them, as an honored guest. He connected with them for whatever period of time they had together, and he created a bond of friendship that could have lasted a lifetime. In the church, hospitality is our offering. It's our offering to others. It's offering our very best to every person that steps foot through the door with no expectation that they will return. Abraham never knew whether he was going to see these people before, but when you think about the culture of the Mideast that happened in Abraham's time, you can understand how boundaries and racial divide really didn't make a difference. If it was a stranger, if it was a traveler, you needed to connect and extend hospitality to them. We're called to shower hospitality on our guests and to every single person who comes through the door simply because it's the right thing to do. Our goal is to mirror the loving welcome of Jesus Christ, and that's how we become Christ for everyone who comes into our midst. And it doesn't matter whether they come for the men's dinner, worship service, a small group, preschool, the blood drive. Anytime someone walks through the door, if they meet a member of the church, we're called to extend them hospitality, gracious, extravagant hospitality. So when we stand to leave this place today, try it. Maybe 5 minutes is too much. Try 2 minutes. If you don't walk right through the door, if you just take the time, look around for someone whose name you've forgotten and try that one out. Could you help me with a name? It's the first step that's the hardest. It really is the first step that's the hardest. So may this be the first day that the work that we're doing helps to create a culture of hospitality here at Medford United Methodist Church. Don't forget to show hospitality and a warm welcome to the strangers that you meet, because that stranger might just be an angel, might be God. A stranger is just a friend waiting to happen. Amen.